So, I've heard that for the inauguration, the Russian broadcasting company, Russia Today, is going to be unveiling a new cinematic technique they're calling Whiz-O-Rama.
You don't have to be poor anymore. Jesus is here.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is running around the house like a maniac. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to start this episode with a bit of sad news. The first is that occasional guest and friend of the podcast, Heretic Woman, is in the hospital suffering from complications due to the flu. I don't have any details on her condition other than she's in the ICU and resting comfortably. Normally, at times like this, I'd be contacting friends or relatives of the person to see if there was a GoFundMe campaign set up to help cover the costs of the medical bills, but Heretic Woman's a Canadian, so she doesn't have to worry about getting slapped with a $75,000 bill for spending a day or two in the hospital, unlike we Americans and our exceptionalism. The second bit of bad news I have is that America won't be able to join us for this episode. She's in the process of moving and, as you can imagine, is busy as fuck right now. She had planned to be here, but I got a message from her at about 2 a.m. saying that she was still an hour away from home and hadn't unloaded the truck yet. So she'll be spending the day unpacking and trying to sort things out. The move was a bit of a surprise for her. She was planning on moving next month, but the lease on her current place was up sooner than she thought, so she's been in a rush to get moved this month. Hopefully she'll be unpacked and settled in to be on by the 28th of this month. Crazily enough, she's also got a car she's trying to figure out how to get to me. She inherited it after her grandmother passed away, and I'm not sure if she's got it in Arizona or if it's still in Texas where her grandmother lived. Of course, if she does manage to get it here, then I've still somehow got to come up with about $1,000 for taxes, title, insurance, and the reinstatement fees for my license. Needless to say, the odds of me having that kind of money soon are pretty slim, so I'm not worrying about it. And I'm going to ask for the help of the listeners out there, if you folks don't mind. I have decided that one of the things I'm going to do to try to combat the damage Trump is likely to do to this country is to launch another podcast which revolves around how best to combat Trump. I need a name for this podcast, and I can't really think of anything which will grab people. Much of the podcast is going to center around Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer, since it prefigures so much of what Trump did to win the election. Based on the views of YouTube videos related to Hoffer, mentioning him in the title isn't going to attract much attention. This current podcast has more downloads than do most such videos combined. So if you've got any good suggestions, send them to me at trailerparkatheist@gmail.com or message me on Facebook. And I'm going to apologize for the rough edges on this episode. I kind of had to toss everything out since America wasn't going to be here. Though, well, just to ramble directly into the thing that everybody's been talking about and that I really wish America was here for, because she is so good at coming up for quips for things like this, is, of course, the whole business about the secret dossier that got leaked, which claims that the Russians have videotape of Trump in a hotel room with prostitutes pissing on a bed. Now, as somebody pointed out, that's unrealistic, but Hillary running a murdering pedophile ring from the basement of a pizza parlor is realistic? Come on. It's certainly plausible that it could have happened. I don't know. Be honest, I really don't want to know if you know what I'm saying. It's not the kind of video I want to watch. I don't care who's in it. I'm not a fan of piss videos at all. But what's not being made clear in the news is that the report BuzzFeed leaked isn't necessarily the one that the CIA or the intelligence agencies showed to Trump and Obama. That is a report written by an ex-MI5 or MI6 agent who it works for a private security firm. Now, what I've seen mentioned only a couple of times is that at least one news outlet had a copy of that report back in October. And they released only portions of it because apparently they thought it was good journalism to only release things that they felt could be substantiated. That news organization was Mother Jones, who is a bastion of liberal reporting in this country. But they, according to Mother Jones, they'd seen the report, they had a copy of it in October and published a couple of stories on it before the election. Unlike BuzzFeed, however, they didn't release the whole report. Now, I don't know when BuzzFeed got their copy, but this is one of those things that, you really wish they dumped everything when they did, because maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't be getting President Trump on Friday. But at the very least, Mother Jones could have attached the whole report to the article. They write the article saying we can't verify some of these claims made in this report, so we have no idea if they're true or not. And then if the rest of the media didn't pick up on it, well, that's on them. But I am a little disappointed in Mother Jones for not going and dumping the whole thing out there. Of course, like me, they probably didn't believe that people would actually be dumb enough to elect Trump. But as H.L. Mencken said, nobody ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the average American. I think it was Mencken. So, of course, if the report was the worst thing we could expect from Trump, then, well, that would be far better than what it's likely to be. I want to point out, because again, this is also not really mentioned in the news reports, is that the reason Trump engaged in the water sports, if he did, is because staying in the same hotel room as the Obamas had, and he really didn't like Obama, and he had them piss on the bed, as a fuck you to the Obamas. That certainly seems in line with his character. He is described by many people who know him as petty and vindictive. I think we can all agree that if there's somebody you don't like and you go to a hotel where they stayed in a particular room and you piss all over the bed in that particular room, that's pretty much petty and vindictive. Now, along with this is a story that comes from Jezebel.com. Something extremely concerning happened in a confidential briefing to Congress on Russian hacking. This morning, members of Congress had a confidential briefing about suspected Russian hacking. We don't know what exactly was said, obviously, but Democratic members emerged furiously angry, yelling about FBI Director James Comey and darkly promising the public will hear more later. And then it goes on to say, The Hill reports that a number of Democrats emerged from the meeting convinced that Comey is, quote, unfit to lead the agency, unquote. I was non-judgmental until the last 15 minutes. I no longer have that confidence in him. Representative Tim Walz, Democrat of Minnesota, ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, said as he left the meeting in the Capitol. And they go on to quote a number of other Democratic leaders. Now, the problem with this, of course, is you can't expect the Democratic leaders to be unbiased on the subject. It is entirely possible that they are just playing political biases. Of course, considering what Comey did during the election, it's also entirely possible that they are absolutely correct. But so long as they're the minority party in Congress, I don't expect them to be able to do much of anything about it. And the Republicans, because Trump beat the person they hate the most, aren't really going to care what Comey did or didn't do, because they, like a lot of politicians, regardless of party, are more interested in winning than in doing what's right. And the next bit of comforting news comes from Gizmodo.com. Trump just dismissed the people in charge of maintaining our nuclear arsenal. Between the Trump transition team's infighting, incompetence, and high-profile resignations, any decisions that signaled even a modicum of stability for the country would come as a relief at this point. Unfortunately, the nascent Trump administration isn't inclined to calm anyone's nerves. According to an official within the Department of Energy, the Trump transition team has declined to ask the head of the National Nuclear Safety Administration and his deputy to temporarily stay on in their roles after Trump takes office on January 20th, which is a break from protocol. Normally, because the director and the deputy director are political appointees, what happens is when a new president is elected, the appointee send a letter of resignation to the new president saying that, on the date you take office, I will resign my position. Usually at that point, if it's a lower level position in the government, as opposed to, say, a cabinet position, the president will say, no, I want you to stay on until we can pick your replacement. Or, they say, no, I think you're doing a fine job. You may stay on if you choose to do so. Trump's transition team hasn't talked to these people. And these are the guys that are in charge of running the whole nuclear stockpile operation. Now, obviously that doesn't mean, people are going to suddenly start dropping nukes, or, our missiles are just going to be abandoned in their silos or what have you. But what it does mean is that the people in charge who Trump places are not necessarily going to be ones who've followed around the previous heads and learned how things work. And given Trump's track record of appointing people to cabinet positions who are clearly unqualified for the job, his pick for the Secretary of Education hates public schooling and believes creationism should be taught in schools. Not to mention putting a brain surgeon in charge of HUD. Or a potentially drug-addicted ex-governor who wants to run the Department of Energy, probably for the same reason that Sarah Palin wanted to run the Department of Energy, because they mistakenly believe that the Department of Energy is who controls things like drilling for oil and natural gas. That is the Department of the Interior. So we're probably going to get somebody who doesn't know what the hell they're doing, doesn't really care, and is potentially, because that's the kind of people he likes, overwhelmingly loyal to Trump. So they won't be doing the job out of a sense of duty to the country. They'll be doing the job out of a sense of duty to Trump. It should be obvious why that's a problem. It really should. But in dealing with all kinds of people, I realize that no, it isn't always obvious. If there comes a situation where this person is asked to do something by Trump that is screamingly obvious to be not in the best interests of the country, instead of saying, no, I'm not going to do this because you'll harm the country, we need to find a better way to do this, they will do exactly what Trump says, happily and unquestioningly. That is a problem. And the current director has been there, since the Bush administration. So Obama didn't feel the need to replace him, and I think he may have worked for Clinton as well. But regardless, this is he was somebody who Obama appointed to the job. He was somebody who was carried over from a previous administration. And, even if Trump was going to replace him, having him there in the position while they trained the replacement seems like a really good idea to me. Of course, what could happen, and hopefully will happen, is that when Trump's replacement gets there, he immediately calls his predecessor and says, look, we'll hire you for an insane amount of money to be a consultant to help me get this job figured out. That's not an ideal solution because there's better ways of doing it, but it is certainly preferable to just handing the keys of the nuclear arsenal over to somebody who doesn't have any idea how to do anything. And this is kind of the way that heck of a job Brownie got his job as the head of the EPA. Or, not EPA, FEMA. Because he was a Bush appointee who was appointed to a lower level position, and then the head of FEMA resigned, and because he was next in line, he got bumped up basically automatically without having to go through a congressional review, in which case they would have found out that his only prior qualifications for running FEMA was that he was the judge at horse events. Equine events, excuse me. Fancy pants, upper crust buttfuckers. But hey, to give you all a little hope about this, there is some really, really good news that I'm sure will restore all your confidence in the country. And this juicy little tidbit comes from Christianity Today. Hundreds of prayer warriors descend on Washington to provide prayer shield for Donald Trump. Like angels from heaven, hundreds of prayer warriors have descended on Washington, D.C. to undertake a crucial mission, protect U.S. President-elect Donald Trump by building a prayer shield around him ahead of his January 20th inauguration. Among these prayer warriors are the members of a new group called POTUS Shield, as in President of the United States, who gathered inside the National Press Club on Thursday, CBN News reported. Pastor Eric Majette from Virginia Beach, Virginia said POTUS Shield is comprised of pastors from all over America. We're actually a prayer group. We pray for leaders across our nation. A group of pastors come together to pray for our nation and our leaders, particularly the new administration. Okay, I wonder if these are the same guys who decided that they thought it would be a good idea to pray that Obama's term as president would be a very short one. And that, he'd die in office. But, hey, at least they're doing something ineffective rather than doing something which would be effective or problematic. Like calling their congressmen and demanding that they take away rights from gays, or beating up protesters who are peacefully standing there holding signs that say things like, "Fuck you, Trump." So I guess it's okay, but it's so absurd reading this. It's like, oh, we're going to go down there and we're going to pray for Trump. You're going to pray for a man who's most likely an atheist. Yes, he is most likely an atheist. Well, nah, I take that back. He does believe in a God, and that God's name is Donald J. Trump. But, and a man who violated every moral conviction of what the moral majority is supposed to stand for. But because, he was the white guy, they loved him. Well, the white Republican guy. He could have been a white Democrat and they'd have hated him. But because he was a white Republican, they loved him regardless of what he does. Yeah. And I have to say that, it hit me the other day watching all this stuff going down. I really feel sorry for the folks that are doing the Netflix series House of Cards, because they got to be looking at whatever it is they have planned for the next season and going, this is passé, and just throwing it out. I mean, how do you compete with the crazy shit we've seen so far? Okay, so nobody's accused Trump of throwing somebody in front of a train or gassing them in their car, but, that could be next. Now, I don't know how many of you out there have seen the BBC series that's on Netflix now called Black Mirror. The first episode is called National Anthem, and everybody tells people, don't watch that episode first, watch a later episode and then go back to that, because if you watch the first episode, you're going to be unwilling to watch the rest of it, but the other episodes kind of cushion the blow of the first episode. The first episode, and I'm not going to give any spoilers here, is that the British Prime Minister awakes one morning and is informed that one of the princesses, and I don't remember her name, and frankly, I don't give a shit about British royalty to any degree at all. So, but anyway, one of the princesses has been kidnapped, and they're waiting to try, they're waiting for the ransom demand and trying to figure out what's happened to her and where she is. Well, they get their ransom demand, and the demand is that if they want the princess to be released alive, and they have a very short period in which to accomplish this, the Prime Minister has to fuck a pig on live television. And I won't go into everything that happens after that, but it is really, really disturbing. And, I don't know why. I just associate that with Trump. I really don't, but it just seems like that's like something that's going to happen. I won't say any more because I don't want to spoil the episode for anybody who's seen it. Actually, I tell you what, I'll do what the guys on SGU do. Take this point and skip ahead 30 seconds if you don't want to hear the spoiler. Okay? Anyways, now that everybody skipped ahead, they can't find the princess in time, so the Prime Minister's got to go out, bang the pig on television. Everybody watches in the beginning, and then realizes they feel awfully dirty. And you watch the episode, and you sit there, and afterwards you're like, that's worse than a terrorist attack. Okay, I think that's been about 30 seconds, so we'll just leave it like that, and the people who skipped, they can, if they watch the episode, they can go back and listen to this later. Okay. Now, let's switch to some religious discussion here. From TheGuardian.com, we have Pope Francis's authority challenged by Knights of Malta over condom row. Pope Francis is facing an extraordinary challenge to his authority from an ancient Catholic order that is refusing to cooperate with a Vatican investigation into the sacking of a top official over the distribution of tens of thousands of condoms. The controversy has been simmering for weeks, but the Knights of Malta's rejection of the investigation, an unprecedented act in recent times, has now escalated the matter. The conservative order said in a statement it intended to protect its sovereignty from official oversight, and its members had the legal right not to cooperate with the Vatican investigation, which was approved by Pope Francis late last year and is being led by the Vatican's second most senior official, the Secretary of State Pietro Parolin. Now, the article starts out with this tone, and when you get to the bottom of it, you realize that the opening is misleading. And here's why. Because it looks like, well, the Pope is trying to figure out why the guy was fired over the condom issue, and and the implication is that he wasn't really all that upset about the guy giving out condoms. That's not how it happened, apparently, at least as the way the rest of the article reads. The Knights of Malta is blocking the investigation because they supported that official giving out the condoms. That's right. A Catholic organization didn't care that one of their members was handing out tens of thousands of condoms. The Pope fired him because he was doing that. So they're blocking the investigation to protect themselves from being implicated in aiding him in his job of handing out condoms. So the conservative ones, in this instance, isn't the Pope, or isn't the Knights of Malta, it's the Pope. So, I don't get why they structured the article at the beginning of it the way they did, because it is terribly misleading. And, I thought when I was reading it, I was like, this can't be right. This doesn't seem to be making any sense. But, you go through, you read the whole thing, and it just sounds like they're talking about, what they're describing something the opposite of the way as it happens. The guy who got fired is the Maltese Order's Grand Chancellor Albrecht von Boslager, who was suspended on December 8th after he refused to resign after allegations that thousands of condoms were distributed in Myanmar by its charitable arm under his watch. Now, if if you're opposed to the distribution of condoms, and as this guy claims that he stopped the practice after he learned about it, why would you refuse to resign? It seems to me like it was an obvious failure if, these things happen unbeknownst to him and then he stopped it. I'm not expressing myself very well. I'm sorry about that. But, the way the article reads, it's, well, no, the Maltese are using this to get back at the Pope, blah, blah, blah. But, the elements of it don't say that, don't seem to indicate that. It just, I don't know. Like I said, maybe I'm reading it wrong. Of course, there'll be a link to it in the show notes, so you can read the article and make up your own mind. And now for a little local religious news. From newschannel5.com, former Gallatin church pastor charged with crime. Now, I love that headline because they don't mention what the crime was. if it was some ordinary guy on the street, well, they'd name what the crime was. But because this is a church pastor, they don't. Now, I'm going to give you 3 guesses as to what that crime could have been, and the first 3 don't count, because I know what you're thinking, and you're absolutely right. A former pastor at a well-known Middle Tennessee church, and I need to point out this is a mega church. They have a moderately large building that they're now expanding a couple of miles from my house, and they have satellite locations elsewhere, and it's one of those things where, you know, you go into the church and, you know, there's a assistant pastor there, but there's a big old projection screen with the real pastor broadcasting from wherever. Or he's there and he broadcasts to the other satellite churches. I don't remember. But this isn't, you know, your average mom and pop church. This is a mega church. I get mailings from them all the time saying, you know, come see us. We're doing this. We're doing that. You know. Detectives said that the charges came after an investigation involving an alleged video made of a teenage girl. Bum, bum, bum! The suspect in this case, identified as Jody Dwayne Brown, was a worship leader for both adults and youth ministry at Freedom Church in Gallatin. Brown has been charged with attempted aggravated sexual exploitation of a minor and unlawful photography in violation of privacy. And I love this quote from the sheriff deputy. We have young people and older people and mix of two, and video taking place that maybe shouldn't take place, but it's important to investigate, said Sumner County Sheriff's Detective Eddie Cripps. Cripps said they began looking into the case after the church reported a complaint had been filed. Cripps added the alleged incident did not happen at the church, but at Brown's home this past October. The teenage girl was there swimming with others in the pool. Once done swimming, she went to the shower and in the restroom noticed a camera placed in the exterior window from the outside, and she learned Mr. Brown had placed the device in the window, said Cripps. After spotting the cell phone camera, the teen told the detective she quickly ran from the home to her car. Not explained in the story is why it took so long to arrest this guy. Did the church immediately report his actions to the police, or did they sit on him for a while until the girl's parents said, you're going to do something about this, or we're going to sue? I don't know, but I'm guessing that probably the family had to threaten to sue to get anything done. Oh. Okay, and one space news story this week from Gizmodo.com. This may be the best explanation yet for that mysterious alien megastructure. New research suggests that Tabby star, the celestial object voted most likely to host an alien megastructure, is acting weirdly because it recently annihilated an entire planet, and the shattered remains of that planet are now producing strange flickering effects. It's probably the best theory we've heard so far. It's not aliens. At least that's the conclusion reached by a trio of astronomers from the University of Columbia and the University of Berkeley. Rather, the scientists say that the slow dimming of Tabby's star, along with its bizarre and dramatic dips in light, sometimes by as much as 22%, are likely the result of a celestial collision involving the star and one of its planets. The new paper, authored by Brian Metziger, Nicholas Stone, both from Columbia, and Ken Shen from Berkeley, is currently undergoing peer review at the astronomical journal Monthly Notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. Basically, what they feel happened is that the planet's orbit decayed enough that when it got close to the star, it was ripped apart, and pieces of this planet, as they hit the star, caused bright flashes and dimming and things like that. I think it's the Death Star, and they blowed up Alderaan. I don't know, but they are supposed to be turning more telescopes to look at Tabby's star, try and get a better idea of what the hell's going on, because it is really, really bizarre. And I don't think that this theory is based on any results that they've gotten so far. I think it's based on existing data that they've had. And as mentioned on a previous episode, in going back and looking over the data since they began studying the star, this has been happening for about a century now. So this isn't a new thing. It didn't just happen. Well, of course it didn't just happen because it's 1,800 light years away. So, it happened a really long time ago. Now, the thing that they're not certain about is the size of the planet that it hit the sun. Based on what the article says, if this is what happened, it seems to me the most likely thing is you had a planet about the size of Jupiter that had moons orbiting it, and the first effects were the moons getting sucked into the star, and then the Jupiter-sized world getting sucked into the star. We won't know until further research is done. They have some things that they're going to look for with the star, because if their theory is correct, then they should see certain effects in the light that comes from the star. But we won't know when that'll happen. So it's just going to be watch, see if we get this result. Of course, if we've seen the final stages of it, then we've got an issue of, we won't be able to determine it because we won't see the necessary effects again. One thing gives me pause about this.
Back in about 03, in the early days of the internet, I was on a message board that the bad astronomer himself participated in. And we had this discussion, he and I and other people, about something like this. I mentioned, the discussion was about oddball theories on astronomical events. And I mentioned I had a friend who, his belief was that what happened with the solar system over the billions of years is that gradually the planets would all slowly spiral into the sun, and that's what provided the sun with its energy.
Now, bad astronomer said, that's absurd because the size of the star compared to any of the planets is it is so massive that they wouldn't make a significant difference for the star. And the other thing that gives me pause about this is you get a gas giant close enough to a star, and the pressure from the solar wind and things like that will blow off the atmosphere of the gas giant if it's orbiting that star for a long enough period of time. How long that is, I don't know. I can remember when I was a kid, before we discovered any exosolar planets, the belief was that a solar system could only look something like ours, that you could not have a gas giant form exist within a certain distance of the sun, because, as I said, the solar winds and everything would blow away the atmosphere. Now, of course, we have found a number of planets that are gas giants, which are really close to their star. Some of them, I believe, are closer to their star than Mercury is to our sun. Now, how long they've been there, how long they're going to stay there, and what size they were, etc., I don't know. And I also don't know how big Tabby's star is. Depending on what kind of star it is, even a planetary body like the Earth could have a big impact on it, because there are stars which aren't that much larger than Jupiter. I mean, when I say aren't that much larger, hey, the Great Red Spot on Jupiter is twice the size of the Earth. So, I mean, even if that star is 10% the size of Jupiter, 10% larger than Jupiter, it's still a big fucking object. But you get my point. That there are, it's not like, Earth compared to the sun, where the Earth is just a little pinprick in relation to the size of the sun. But again, they're going to be studying the hell out of this, so hopefully we'll get an answer soon. And I hope it's aliens. Probably won't be. Be some dumb, boring thing. Okay, I need to go, because, as you can tell, the episode's late, and I have a doctor's appointment this morning, and I've got to start getting ready for that. I will talk to you folks later. Next week will be, I don't remember what book. It'll be a new book from the Apocrypha. I don't know if I have a guest on or not. Still waiting to hear about that. And it's a good thing I didn't get the episode edited before I went to the doctor's. Came home and stumbled across this article from Salon.com that I want to mention to give you an idea of what's going on in the seamier parts of the interwebs. The article's entitled, "The Alt-Right Eats Its Own. Neo-Nazi podcaster Mike Enoch quits after doxers reveal his wife is Jewish." Doxing someone is when you publish their personal information like their home address, phone number, etc., on the web. A doxer is a person who actually publishes that information. So, anyways, the guy, this Mike Enoch guy, is a co-host of a neo-Nazi podcast called The Daily Shoah, which is a deliberately offensive pun on the Hebrew term for the Holocaust as well as The Daily Show. And here's the part that should really bother you. They had around 100,000 listeners. Put that in perspective. Most podcasts out there don't have 100,000 listeners. There are 1, 2, maybe 3 atheist-related podcasts that I would be willing to bet had around 100,000 listeners. I'm sure you all know, you can guess at least one of them. But the only podcasts that average that kind of number are the ones done by the major media outlets like NPR, ABC, CNN, things like that. And then you've got the second tier, which are the guys like Leo Laporte over at the Twit Network. There was another one called Revision 3, but they've changed hands, and there's something else there in a lower bracket, but not much lower, if at all. There's the Panoply Network and a few others that are they're either first or second tier. And then your third tier would be, the ones who are above, say, 1,000 listeners per episode, but below 100,000. Most podcasts of any genre out there average less than 1,000 listeners. But the fact that should be disturbing is at least one neo-Nazi podcast produced in America is in the big leagues. I mean, if you're bringing in 100,000 listeners, you're up there in terms of podcasting. I believe Seth Andrews has mentioned he gets over 100,000 an episode on average. He's the only one I know who's given out his stats more than once. And I know he's way, way up there. Which, considering he's got the voice for broadcasting, it's not really surprising. But I don't know how many neo-Nazi podcasts there are out there, and I don't know what their listenership level is, but I think I'm going to start looking into that, because that is really disturbing. I would not have expected any of them to be that high. Obviously, I was wrong. Okay, now I'll get out of here and you guys can go back to your lives.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fosnots.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.